Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ranking Chair, as well as the members of the committee. The primary duty of the National Park Service is to protect the national parks and the national monuments under its jurisdiction and keep them as nearly in their natural state as this can be done in view of the fact that access to them must be provided in order that they may be used and enjoyed. These words were written by Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service back in 1925. For much of the last century, they have held true until now. With the offering and signing of the lease at Floyd Bennett Field, the federal government is going directly against what Mather and countless other officials through the decades have repeatedly said should be the primary duty of the National Park Service. Rather than providing access to this national park space, the federal government is restricting the ability of the public to fully enjoy the 1,300 acres of parkland on the shores of Jamaica Bay. Instead of enabling public access, the National Park Service is instead agreeing to house 2,000 people on the former runway of this aviation landmark. Not only is this decision to house thousands of people a violation of the founding ideals of the National Park Service, but is also a violation of the agreement made to establish the Gateway National Recreation Area as well. On September 26th of 1972, then Congressman Frank Brasco made it clear why this site is incompatible with any plans for housing at this location. There are no sewers, no sidewalks, no curbs, no streets. There are no schools, no medical facilities, or houses of worship. Floyd Bennett Field is totally filled land with water 8 feet below the surface. Transportation facilities are virtually non-existent, and the nearest subway is 4 miles from the site. A single bus route now serves the area. The congressman also explained that New York City faces a serious lack of open recreation space, and Floyd Bennett Field would provide that access to open green spaces for countless residents of Brooklyn, Queens, and beyond. Thanks to Congressman Brasco's argument, a state proposal constructing housing at Floyd Bennett Field was removed, and by a vote of 76-13, Floyd Bennett Field was made a part of the Gateway National Recreation Area. Today, the situation is not much different than it was back in 1972. The closest subway station is still 4 miles away. The area still has no schools, medical facilities, houses of worship, and is still only served by one bus line. What has changed, however, is that the park now welcomes as many as 1 million people per year to enjoy its open spaces and programmed events. It also is home to specialized NYPD units, a training facility for the Department of Sanitation, and even a Marine Reserve unit, among other assets. All of these stand to be disrupted by the placement of 2,000 people, or if the mayor's office is to be believed, as many as 7,500 people in the area. The decision to house thousands of people at this site has also been done without following the proper protocols necessary for such an endeavor. Namely, the decision is being pursued without following the federally mandated NEPA process. Pursuant to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, federal law requires agency decision makers make informed decisions via a codified system of studies, assessments, and input sessions. And the NEPA handbook itself states clearly, actions taken in response to an emergency are not exempt to NEPA review. Therefore, the NEPA process must be complete before any agency makes a final decision on the proposed action. This was not done. Additionally, there was no process of public notice, effectively shutting out the ability of local community to voice their concerns about this sudden and radical change to their local parkland. This has effectively turned our national parks, something Wallace Stanger once said was the best idea we ever had, an absolutely American, absolutely democratic, into something that's entirely undemocratic indeed. Already we have seen programming that should have taken place at Floyd Bennett Field be canceled to accommodate this base camp. Already an art festival from Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy has been scrapped, and we can be sure that additional planned events will follow. The placement of the migrant base camp at Floyd Bennett Field flies in the face of the founding ideals of the National Park Service and erodes the democratic underpinnings that have been the hallmark of our parks since their inception. For these reasons, it is vital that the federal government revoke the lease for Floyd Bennett Field and enable the public to fully use this space, just as they have continually done since 1972. Thank you for the time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes Assemblywoman Williams for 5 minutes.
Okay, good morning, Chair and Ranking Chair. In recent weeks, the Governor of New York State and the Mayor of New York City proposed a plan to use our national park, Floyd Bennett Field, via the Biden administration to temporarily house migrants have become a great concern for our community. Please let me share some of these concerns. This past weekend, there was almost 5 inches of water covering runway 19, the exact location proposed for housing the migrants. This is not an isolated event, but rather a frequent occurrence. This serves as a stark reminder to the potential dangers of Floyd Bennett Field. In addition, it's a transit desert and has no infrastructure, no plumbing, no electricity, no sewage system. As you may know, SECA mandates a rigorous review of environmental, social, economic impacts for any project. However, in this particular case, it is evident that due diligence was not executed in compliance with SECA's multi-step decision process. This non-compliance not only negates the law, but also risks unforeseen detrimental consequences on multiple fronts, including the socioeconomic well-being of the local residents, of the environmental sanctity of the area. The failure to adhere to NEPA regulations further illuminates the glaring shortcomings in evaluating the proposed plan. NEPA's binding regulations are designed to safeguard against environmentally detrimental proposals, ensuring the preparation of environmental impact statement. The absence of these critical assessments raises grave concerns about the underlying environmental sustainability and safety of relocating migrants to this area. Floyd Bennett Field, a national park, is a treasure of natural beauty and biodiversity. Housing individuals here is equivalent to tarnishing the sanctity of Yellowstone National Park. The irreversible damage of flora and fauna and the destruction of our natural beauty are contrary to the ethos of conservation and preservation that national parks symbolize. The 1972 decision by Congress against the housing plan of Floyd Bennett Field, based on its inadequacy for residents, must not be overlooked. This historical precedent serves as a legislative evidence of the sustainability of the area. Revisiting and overturning such well-founded decisions without adequate reassessment suggests a lack of prudence and disregard for established legislation. Migrants, many of whom have already faced immense suffering, are entitled to a safe and secure living environment. Placing them in a flood-prone area during an active hurricane season, as well as colder months ahead, is neither humane nor ethical. The proposal not only risks the safety of the migrants, but also impacts the welfare and quality of life of the local residents surrounding Floyd Bennett Field. It is crucial to consider the cumulative implications to the community, which will have to bear the brunt of the socioeconomic and environmental disruptions. In conclusion, on behalf of every resident of the 5th Ninth Assembly District, I ask the dedicated members of this Committee of Natural Resources to take these points into consideration and reject this proposal. Please reflect on our commitment to uphold the principles of our environmental stewardship, legislative compliance, ethical responsibility, and humanitarian compassion. Together with your support, we will continue to ensure that our national park and its historic sites will be preserved for future generations to come. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Williams, thank you for your testimony, as well as Councilwoman Ariola, thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Ms. Sacer for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Grijalva, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Eleanor Acer, and I'm Senior Director for Refugee Protection at Human Rights First. My testimony today is going to focus on some of the key steps that the Biden administration and Congress should take to ensure and sustain humane, legal, and orderly processes as U.S. communities, both at the border and across the country, receive migrants and people seeking asylum. Key steps include to to significantly improve access to work permits, to increase critical funding to support reception in border and destination communities, to properly resource humanitarian aid, resettlement, safe shelter, asylum and immigration court adjudications in the United States, and to reject and counter dangerous rhetoric painting migrants and asylum seekers as threats or invaders. In recent years, the human rights situation in many countries in the Americas have deteriorated, pushing people to flee in search of protection, safety, and stability. In reality, though, the vast majority of the world's refugees are hosted by countries other than the United States. 6 million of the 7.3 million, now I think nearly 7.7 million, that have fled from Venezuela are in other countries, in Colombia, in Brazil, Peru, Costa Rica, and other places in Latin America and the Caribbean. The United States is more than capable of humanely receiving and fairly processing the claims of people seeking asylum. The steps outlined in my testimony today are crucial to doing so. First, the prompt provision of work permits is critical to supporting U.S. communities as well as for migrants and asylum seekers to support themselves and their families. The reality is that immigrants have always been and always will be a boon to New York City and the nation. In a letter to President Biden and congressional leaders, over 100 executives of major corporations explained that there are labor shortages in many U.S. industries, and there's a compelling need for expedited processing of asylum applications and work permits. Last week, the Biden administration announced important steps to improve work authorization processing, as well as to designate and extend TPS for Venezuelans, moves that will help more people to work, house, and support themselves more quickly. But more action is needed, as outlined in my written testimony. Second, Congress should increase shelter and support program funding and increase funding to all cities receiving migrants and asylum seekers through the ASPIRE Act, which we urge you all to support. Third, the Biden administration should also double down on some of the effective, humane, and legal policies that it has already initiated or announced, and reject those that punish, ban, and block people seeking asylum. I've laid out some key steps along these lines in my testimony, and I'm happy to talk about this later further. Congressional support is essential to assure the appropriations needed to implement effective solutions. By contrast, the failure of Congress to appropriate necessary resources, including via a government shutdown, is sure to thwart orderly migration management and adjudications. It's deeply concerning to see many of the most harmful and ineffective policies from recent years included in legislation passed by the House, called the Secure Border Act of 2023. It's a patchwork of extreme anti-immigrant proposals that would shut down the U.S. asylum system and target families and children. Policies that ban, block, and turn away people seeking asylum are not a solution. They're actually part of the problem. The crisis we are facing is a global humanitarian crisis. Other nations, including those with far less resources, are welcoming and hosting the overwhelming majority of the world's refugees. We can and must do better, and I look forward to discussing this with you further.
Ms. Acer, thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Spencer for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Grijalva, and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Kenneth Spencer, and my testimony this morning is delivered in my capacity as Chairman of the United States Park Police Fraternal Order of Police. Simply put, our organization represents the interests of approximately 350 sworn law enforcement officers of the United States Park Police. I am honored to be here today and very thankful for this opportunity to share officer safety concerns regarding the proposed migrant shelter facilities on Floyd Bennett Field. On average, U.S. Park Police officers protect 160,000 daily visitors to our national parks in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and New York City, patrolling a geographic area of over 30,000 acres and more than 75 miles of highway. Notably, we are the world's leading law enforcement agency when it comes to supporting large-scale special events and other First Amendment activities. Despite our sweeping law enforcement jurisdiction across Floyd Bennett Field and the surrounding communities, the September 15th, 2023 lease agreement between the Interior Department and the City of New York, 61 pages in all, includes only one reference to the United States Park Police, which restates our role as the primary entity responsible for law enforcement issues outside of the camp perimeter within the boundaries of the park area. Tellingly, the National Park Service never consulted with our agency or our officers to collaborate on law enforcement concerns or operational implementation. Let me be perfectly clear. Even without the migrant shelter on Floyd Bennett Field, we are at least 300 officers short of our required minimum level. Our capacity to serve and protect the public today is literally bursting at the seams. The idea that the U.S. Park Police is prepared to address 2,000 new migrants left under tents with nothing to do and no ability to communicate is not only imprudent, but it is also perilous. The proposed migrant shelter on Floyd Bennett Field falls under the jurisdiction of our Jamaica Bay Station Unit. As of today, there are 25 sworn officers assigned to this unit. Typically, there are only 2 officers on duty per shift. I think that's worth restating. Under the officer staffing levels that exist today, just 2 police officers will be responsible for all the law enforcement matters outside of the tent. The impact of this staffing reality is undeniable. The surrounding public, our officers, and the migrants themselves will face significant safety risks 24/7. In addition to the extreme shortages of our officers, the Jamaica Bay unit does not have any of the modern facilities that would be needed to provide law enforcement services surrounding the migrant camp. For example, we have 1 holding cell for prisoner processing. Our station phones and computers are at best unreliable, and the station is left unstaffed most of the day. Windows to the station are unsecured and accessible on the ground level from the outside of the station. To my knowledge, the National Park Service has no plans to address or fix any of this in advance of the migrants moving in. In fact, the NPS superintendent of Gateway National Recreation Area refused to request any funds for the United States Park Police under the terms of this lease agreement. Even if one were to ignore the officer staffing shortages and the dilapidated station facilities, as New York City and the Park Service have done, I have many grave concerns about our agency's readiness to protect the public and the migrants themselves. For example, will the Park Service provide us full-time translators to facilitate communications? What will be the processing protocols for arrests? How can we protect migrants from the dangerous currents in Jamaica Bay, the toxic areas containing discarded radioactive materials, and abandoned buildings where homeless are known to congregate? What protections are in place for the adjacent youth sports center, bird watching sanctuaries, fishing areas, and children's petting zoo? I'm not a lawyer, but under these knowingly dangerous conditions, I can only imagine the number of lawsuits the Park Service might face. Our officers are truly passionate about serving the public throughout the communities under our 3 jurisdictions. Unfortunately, the National Park Service appears all too willing to erect these migrant camps in a region that is entirely unprepared to mitigate against the safety risks. My testimony this morning is not one of politics or public policy regarding migrants. Indeed, the law enforcement concerns I speak of today are all too real, dangerous, and irresponsible. Regrettably, I fear for the safety of our officers, the public, and the migrants themselves. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this testimony today on behalf of the United States Park Police officers, and I welcome any questions the committee may have.
Mr. Spencer, thank you.